Do you dare enter a house where death and madness breathe within its walls? The classic story, The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, is divided into three parts. Entering a dark and eerie house, becoming acquainted with Roderick and Madeline and their complex psychology, and finally experiencing the catastrophe and the collapse of the house and family. Below is a summary followed by an analysis of the setting, characters, and the central themes of fear, grief, and the twin bond. Part 1. The narrator approaches the Usher house on a dark and silent day near the end of the year, riding through a land devoid of life and beauty. Late in the evening, he reaches the ancient and terrifying Usher mansion. From the very first moment that the house and its surroundings, the cold stone walls, hollow, eye-like windows, dead trees, and dark lake, come into view, an overwhelming sense of dread and melancholy seizes him. He cannot identify the source of this strange and terrifying feeling, yet it seems the entire environment, even the air, is sickly and heavy, emanating death and decay. The reflection of the house and trees in the lake intensifies the eerie feeling. The narrator has come at the invitation of Roderick Usher, his childhood friend. Roderick's anxious letter described his physical and mental illness and requested the narrator's presence for comfort and support. The Usher family, an ancient lineage renowned for art and refinement, has a small and limited bloodline. The name House of Usher refers both to the physical house and the dwindling family line. The interior of the house mirrors its exterior. Large, high-ceilinged, and dimly lit rooms. Pointed windows set high that let in little, reddish light. Dark floors and walls. And furnishings. Ancient furniture, books, and relics of forgotten wars that create a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Moving through this environment, the narrator encounters the few silent servants and reaches Roderick's room. With a pervasive sense of grief and depression is tangible in every corner. Upon seeing Roderick, the narrator is shocked by his drastic change in appearance and behavior. His skin is pale and ghostly, eyes bright, lips pale but well-shaped, and his soft hair seems to float unnaturally in the air. His behavior is unstable. At times, he is hyperactive and nervous, and at other times, unnaturally calm. These behavioral shifts stem from his struggle to control his intense anxiety and rage. He tells the narrator about his illness, describing it as a hereditary affliction affecting body, mind, and soul. Roderick speaks of extreme sensitivity in his senses. He cannot tolerate the taste of food, is irritated by the smell of flowers. The faintest light burns his eyes, and ordinary sounds terrify him. He believes his illness will ultimately lead to his complete destruction, and that a dreadful, unavoidable death awaits him. The narrator, witnessing this, feels both fear and deep sorrow for the oppressive atmosphere of the house and his old friend. Part 2. Roderick Usher, the narrator's childhood companion, is plagued not by physical pain, but by an overwhelming fear of death that dominates his life. He has not left the house for years and believes the house itself, with its gray walls, high ceilings, and surrounding dark lake, has a direct, destructive effect on his mind and soul. The house is like a living being, depriving him of peace, each corner a reminder of anxiety and sorrow. The principal source of Roderick's grief, however, is the illness of his twin sister, Madeline. She has been his sole companion through the years, now weak, frail, and almost corpse-like. His sorrow for her is so immense that even the narrator's presence and attempts at consolation provide only brief relief. The narrator, compassionate and loyal, attempts to alleviate Roderick's fear and sadness. They paint, read, and listen to music together. Yet everything Roderick creates, his paintings and music, reflects his unstable, terrified mind. His paintings, with their colors and lines, convey anxiety and horror, while his music, even in quiet moments, echoes a trembling and frightened heart. Roderick holds strange and unusual beliefs. He thinks that plants, stones, and even water possess feelings, and that the environment of the house affects the mind. He emphasizes that the house is not merely a physical space, but a living entity that mirrors his worries and fears, each corner imbued with deadly, oppressive energy. Eventually, Roderick reveals a grim truth to the narrator. Madeline has died. Instead of immediate burial, he intends to keep her body in one of the mysterious house vaults for a time. The reason is the peculiar nature of Madeline's illness and the distance to the family cemetery. This decision adds an unnatural, eerie layer to the story, intensifying suspense and anxiety. When Madeline's body is placed in the vault, the narrator notices for the first time the striking resemblance between Roderick and his sister, realizing that they were twins with a deeply strong spiritual connection. Although her body appears almost as if she is merely sleeping, soft and warm to the touch, it is actually cold, adding to the eerie, terrifying atmosphere and heightening the narrator's fear. This moment symbolizes both the inseparable bond between the twins and Roderick's mental collapse, increasing the sense of imminent disaster for the reader. Part 3. The narrator remains in Roderick Usher's ancient, mysterious house. Following the death of his sister Madeline, her body is placed in a dark, damp chamber within the cold walls of the house. In this vault, the narrator notes the uncanny resemblance between Roderick and Madeline. Roderick explains that they were born on the same day and that their bond has always been exceptionally strong. Although Madeline's face still shows some color and even a faint smile, their fear prevents them from looking at her for long, and they close the heavy iron door of the vault and return to the upper rooms, which are no less dim and terrifying than the vault. After Madeline's burial, Roderick's mental state deteriorates sharply. He paces from room to room, face paler and more horrifying than before, eyes void of light, voice trembling, sometimes staring for hours as if listening to sounds imperceptible to the narrator. Gradually, the narrator feels the fear of Roderick merging with his own mind. On the 7th or 8th night after Madeline's burial, the narrator cannot sleep. Trembling, he walks the room, attempting to rationalize the dim light and moving curtains with the wind, but to no avail. Suddenly, a faint sound comes from the door. Roderick enters, still pale, but with eyes filled with a mad, eerie laughter. He leads the narrator to the window to witness a violent night storm. Heavy, low clouds seem to press down on the house, obscuring moonlight and stars, but light is visible from below, from the lake and the stones of the house. The narrator tries to calm him, reading a story for distraction. When the story mentions the breaking of wood and falling iron, similar noises are heard from the distant house. Roderick, nervous and terrified, claims he has heard Madeline moving since the burial, for she was buried alive and now comes to confront him. At that moment, the great door of the house slowly opens, revealing the real Madeline in her shroud, blood on her garments, evidence of her horrific struggle to escape. She pauses briefly at the door, then enters the room, seizing her brother and dragging him down. In shock and terror, Roderick dies. The narrator flees the room and the house. Crossing the house's bridge, he sees the full, blood-red moon shining through a large crack in the front facade, which he had first noticed earlier. The crack suddenly widens, and a fierce wind causes the house walls to collapse. The loud crash echoes, and the Black Lake swallows the remaining ruins of the Usher house, leaving it completely destroyed. Psychological analysis of the story. The Fall of the House of Usher is a quintessential work of Gothic literature, but its significance extends beyond evoking fear and eerie atmospheres. The story can be seen as an in-depth exploration of the human psyche, particularly a disturbed, anxious, and collapsing mind. Poe masterfully links external elements, architecture, nature, and space, to the character's inner states, creating a world in which mind and environment are inseparable. The House of Usher is not only the setting, but also a concrete reflection of its inhabitants' unconscious mind, gradually moving toward madness, dissolution, and death. In this story, family, house, and psyche form a unified system. The decay of the Usher family occurs simultaneously with the physical and mental decline of its members, and ultimately, the physical collapse of the house symbolizes the complete disintegration of mind and identity. From this perspective, The Fall of the House of Usher is a literary, psychological study of chronic anxiety, deep depression, fear of death, pathological attachment, mental repression, and the return of the repressed. Character analysis. 1. Roderick Usher. The central character, gradually collapsing under psychological disorders, is paralyzed by fear of death rather than physical pain. He exhibits depression, isolation, despair, and constant anticipation of death. His unusual beliefs, attributing life to inanimate objects, reflect delusional thinking and the mind's attempt to make sense of formless fear. Roderick is introverted, sensitive, fragile, and highly vulnerable to sensory stimuli. His intense attachment to his sister and the house alienates him from reality. The Usher house embodies his psyche, walls and corridors as the unconscious, stagnant lake as mental inertia, and Madeline as the repressed part of his psyche returning with force. Art and music serve as outlets for his anxiety rather than true creation or enjoyment. 2. Madeline Usher. A quiet, passive character, she is symbolically crucial. Her illness puts her in a liminal state between life and death, becoming the embodiment of a living corpse. Psychologically, Madeline represents Roderick's repressed psyche, a rejected yet indestructible part. She is a silent victim whose return demonstrates that repressed elements eventually surface. Symbolically, she embodies death or the collective unconscious. Her return exposes and shatters Roderick's illusion of control. 3. The narrator. Initially sane, rational, and balanced, the narrator represents reason and the external world. Prolonged exposure to the Usher house transmits Roderick's anxiety to him, blurring the line between reality and hallucination. Compassionate, realistic, and responsible, he acts as the rational observer, recording the psychological collapse he cannot prevent. His main motivation is loyalty to his friend and the effort to preserve rationality in a diseased environment. Analysis of relationships, dependency, trauma, and complexes. The relationship between Roderick and Madeline is a clear example of symbiotic dependency. They're not just siblings, but two halves of one identity. The boundary between self and other is obliterated, The death of one ensures the destruction of the other. This bond resembles a twin complex or a self and shadow relationship, in which Madeline is the shadow of Roderick's psyche. Roderick's relationship with the house is psychotic. He projects his inner anxieties onto the environment, seeing the house as alive. The collapse of the house equates to the collapse of his mind. The narrator's relationship with Roderick is based on empathy and attempts at rescue, but ultimately fails. The narrator tries to play the role of the logical self, but the power of mental illness and the poisonous environment overwhelms him. Connection to psychological concepts. From a Freudian psychoanalytic perspective, the story is a clear example of the return of the repressed. Madeline, buried alive, returns, just as suppressed fears and desires resurface. The death drive, Thanatos, dominates over the life drive, Eros. From a Jungian viewpoint, Madeline symbolizes the shadow, and the house represents the self. The collapse of the house signifies the disintegration of the integrated psyche and the inability to accept the shadow. From an environmental psychology perspective, the story shows how dark, enclosed, and decaying spaces exacerbate psychological disturbances. Ultimately, the story depicts induced madness, folie à deux, where fear and delusion are transferred from one person to another. Conclusion. The Fall of the House of Usher is not a story about the death of a family, but about the death of the human psyche. House, body, mind, and relationships are all equally diseased. With the destruction of the house, the psyche collapses, showing that repression, pathological attachment, and unbridled fear inevitably lead to total ruin.